I'm not really sure whether I should call this cute or cool. This is the Synth Lab Solo. I was sent it for free by the creator of it. Nostril? But anyway, as per usual, I'm not paid to review anything, so I hope this keeps things a little bit more honest. If it isn't obvious, the Solo is based on Beatmania IIDX controllers. I don't have either of my 2DX controllers with me right now, but you can see the sheer size difference of this thing versus a Sound Voltex Con, which is about the size of a 2DX controller as well. And this is what the Solo looks like next to a Pico Voltex controller. So, what is this thing exactly? Well, its main purpose is a macropad. So it's for like extra keys for shortcuts if you need any. You could actually use this to play Beatmania and BMS, but I'll get to that later. Let's start with the unboxing experience first. I'll keep it short, I know nobody actually likes these bits. It comes with a pretty cute carry case, and inside you'll find the Solo in plastic wrap. I already opened it once to test it, so it's not in it. Inside the carry case, there's an additional pocket for extra parts if you got any with it. But if you didn't get any extras, it should still come with an Allen key and extra screws. My first impression of this thing was, wow, this is a lot more solid than I expected. I mean, I kinda knew it would be solid because it's CNC'd aluminium, but it's still surprising when it's in your hands, especially for something this small. Speaking of size, technically it was still a bit bigger than what I expected. Like, somehow in my brain, I thought it would be even smaller when I saw the renders, but hey, what do I know? This is a mechanical macropad, which means that it uses mechanical keyboard switches. On default, you have the choice between Gateron Yellow Pros, Milky Yellows, and Duroc T1 switches. But you can still change them to any other switch you want because this is a hot swap macropad. Speaking of options, this is very customizable. Like on the order webpage, you can change parts of the order and how it will look like with this really nifty viewer. But just note that what you're seeing here are renders, and it won't be exact to real life. And if you're wondering what my configuration was, I'll put it on screen right now. And yes, the Solo is a whopping $135 for the cheapest configuration. This is somewhat typical of custom macropad pricing, but I mean, that is still very steep. As a macropad, it follows the rest of the other macropads in the custom keyboard scene. It runs on QMK and it also has VIA support. So changing keybinds is very easy. You can even use VIA on web browsers now, so that makes changing keybinds even more convenient. This layout is surprisingly useful. I mean, you could use it horizontally or vertically, whichever that just fits your workflow better. Though I did notice that when I use this vertically like how I use my loop deck, the uneven keys are kind of a negative here. But one other thing that's pretty cool about this is that if you prefer the knob on the other side, you can actually switch sides, just like an actual 2DX controller. The knob is actually pretty cool. It uses the Bourne's EC11 rotary encoder, which is the high quality type of encoder that's normally used on pocket arcade controllers like the Pico Voltex and the Pocket Voltex. The knob encoder is also hot swap, which means that you can replace it easily if it ever breaks, or you just want to swap the rotary encoder type with the other ones that they do support. You can also choose between whether you want the encoder to act as a push button, where you press it down and it works as an extra input. Though to be honest, I'm not really sure why you would ever choose not to have this extra function. Okay, changing sides. You can do this, but it still takes more work than the magnetic solution that Phoenix One controllers have, but it's still pretty easy. Just unscrew the 4 screws at the back, and then remove the back plate. And alright, there's like custom cut foam for the controller inside the casing itself, and oh my goodness, that is so cute. Here, you can see the PCB. The traces are so pretty. But anyway, there are 5 screws here that you need to unscrew. These screws hold the top piece to the controller. When you get them off, the top piece should just pop off. At this point, it should be pretty easy to remove the keycaps. After that, you have to get a switch puller, which by the way, isn't included, so be mindful of this, and pull the switches out of the plate. When all of that is off, you can remove the plate, and oh, that's a pretty smart way of supporting both 1P and 2P configuration. I'm not gonna lie. They have all these sockets here, so that you can use whichever based on which orientation you're on. That's pretty smart. But anyway, just turn your plate around and put the switches back on the other direction. Then it's pretty easy. Just repeat all the steps that I've just said in reverse. Press the top piece back on and then screw it on from the other side. Then put the keycaps on and then screw the back piece on, and you're all good. Be sure to screw the knob on properly if you have an extra knob and you are changing it. I know this is pretty easy for it to not be screwed on tight and like the knob just falls off whenever you flip the macropad over, but yeah. And right, here's an extra sound test with Gateron Yellows if you're curious. Okay, so in order to do the controller stuff, you need to reflash the firmware on the pad first. Head to their webpage and download the firmware that you want to use. Then download and install QMK Toolbox. Hold down the rotary encoder before plugging in your controller to enter bootloader mode. If your Solo doesn't have the clickable rotary encoder, disassemble it and then press this small button on the PCB to enter it. It should show up on QMK Toolbox. When it does, select Atmega 32U4 on the MCU drop-down menu, and then select the firmware you want to flash, and then click Clear EEPROM before clicking Flash. After a bit, it should finish flashing and you've reflashed your Solo. Congrats! There aren't enough buttons on the Solo itself for additional 4 option buttons found on most 2DX controllers, so they're actually buried under a second layer that you can access while you hold the turntable down. But I'm not really sure how you access these buttons if you get an encoder option that isn't clickable. The Solo is compatible with Infinitas, Peter Raja, Lunatic Rave 2, and even the Beatmania Ultimate mobile game. Though for this video, I'm only going to stick to Peter Raja. So alright, enough dilly-dallying. It's not very good. Yeah, I don't really know any other words to put in. I really wouldn't recommend you buy this to play 2DX seriously. This is a fun gimmick, but it's not something you should daily drive ever. The key positioning on this thing is extremely cramped. But to be honest, it's not really a problem on its own, other than possibly giving you carpal tunnel early in the future. I mean, why I say it's not a problem is because there's a lot of BMS keybinds and playstyles on existing keyboards already that's even more cramped than this, and people actually use those layouts. But the biggest problem with this thing is, not the keys so much, but the turntable. It's too close to the keys. It's very difficult to scratch. It would be a lot more comfortable to play with if it was further away from the keys. But I can see how that would completely mess with the aesthetics and the looks of the macropad. But it's not the end of the world, I guess, because you can scratch if you scratch from the outside of the turntable instead of scratching from the inside. The macropad becomes more playable when you do that. But there's also issues with grip. The turntable surface is just very smooth. It's not easy to get a good grip on it when you're doing quick scratching sometimes. Technically, this is a thing you could fix with some grip tape, but I really cannot see anyone seriously trying to use this to play 2DX often. I mean, I guess you could use this to play 7-key on Osu or other 7-key games, but personally for me, I can't see myself doing that. But to be fair, this is mostly a me issue because I play with the 1048 playstyle, and oh my goodness, using that playstyle on this thing is very cramped and uncomfortable. I've gotten other friends to try the pad out on BMS, and they generally fared a whole lot better than I did on tougher difficulties. And it didn't look like they had as much or any issues at all with pressing down the keys on the Solo. It was mainly scratching that they had issues with too. They tried a number of playstyles as well. Here's one where my friend played one-handed, like how you would play on a 2DX controller if you were playing on double play on 2DX. Sometimes while using this, I actually kind of wished that the scratch was a giant ISO enter key instead, because it'd be so much easier to scratch and do different hand techniques if it was a key. But honestly, at that point, I should probably just play BMS on my own keyboard. Another interesting thing I noticed about the scratch was that it spazzes out on default in Beta Raja. Like, it skips tracks when you scroll up and down. It's not the end of the world though. You can fix this by changing the number of analog ticks in the settings from 3 to 10 or above. But as to why this happens, it's possibly because the PPR of the encoder in the pad is different from the ones used in arcade controllers. I don't think this happens if you're playing on Infinitas or Beatmania Mobile Ultimate. I guess a really nice plus that the pad has is that it doesn't slide around much. I mean, it can, sort of, if you're really trying, but its general heft and weight prevents it from moving too much during gameplay. And 2DX is just the kind of game that won't leave controllers sliding around all over the place as much as Sound Voltex. I guess I'm a little worried about a turntable slanting left or right when you put pressure on one side, but I think this might be okay. I'm not sure if this happens to the version that doesn't have the clicky encoders on it. So, in conclusion, this is definitely not something I'd recommend for playing 2DX seriously, if that's what you're looking for. This is nothing like the Pico Voltex controllers. This is not meant for you to actually play with, I think. I mean, I guess you could use this to play other games, like Taiko or 4-key. It will work because it has enough keys, but do you want to spend $135 on the cheapest option for something you can already do with every other keyboard? Yeah, that's a tough sell. Yeah, I wouldn't get this for games at all. It is very much a novelty item. But yeah, if you're interested in getting this, I've left the link in the description, and thank you very much to the creator for sending me one to try out. Thanks for watching, and see you guys next week.